Chapter 1385. Fortunately, Jingyu was already dead. The most important thing in the Holy Family was that Qinbai built a graveyard wantonly because of Jingyu's death. Almost the entire Elder Cabinet was alarmed, but the Elder Cabinet knew that they had hidden this from Qinbai. So they didn't say anything and just let Qinbai do it. After all, she was already dead. Xiao Chun and Qinbai finally came to an agreement. Before Xiao Chun left, Qinbai suddenly said to Xiao Chun in a very strange tone, "I didn't expect that you would be able to watch her die with your own eyes without doing anything." This sentence kept echoing in Xiao Chun's mind, but he still couldn't understand why Qinbai would say such a thing. On the carriage back to the Tokyo, Xiao Chun looked out of the window and fell into deep thought. His dark eyes flashed with a cold light. Suddenly, Xiao Chun thought of the scene when Jingyu died. Xiao Chun, if there is an afterlife, I hope we will never meet again. Xiao Chun couldn't get over that sentence for a long time. Why did Jingyu say such words when she was about to die? That desperate look on her face made Xiao Chun's heart tremble slightly. Let me rest for a while. Xiao Chun lowered his eyes slightly and lay down on the soft couch in the carriage. When the people outside heard Xiao Chun's words, they quickly slowed down the carriage and moved forward very slowly. As the carriage swayed, Xiao Chun seemed to have a very, very long dream. In that dream, there was a person who kept calling Xiao Chun's name over and over again. She would smile, and her smile was very beautiful. Or she would scold Xiao Chun. They seemed to love each other very much. That person could affect all of his emotions. That person. Xiao Chun suddenly opened his eyes. His mind was blank. What did he dream of? Why was it so familiar? But after he woke up, his memory was so blurry. Xiao Chun raised his hand and rubbed his aching forehead. He sighed slightly and turned his body to the side and closed his eyes again. Ever since he saw the scene of Jingyu's death, Xiao Chun had been dreaming of strange things for the past few days. These things seemed to be related to Jingyu. Wasn't the person who kept calling Xiao Chun's name Jingyu? Xiao Chun took a deep breath. He turned his head and casually sat on the side. He lowered his eyes slowly and didn't say a word. Jingyu didn't know what was happening because she was knocked unconscious when the fire was ignited. That's right, she was knocked unconscious. My head hurts. Jingyu slowly opened her eyes. The first thing she felt when she opened her eyes was a sharp pain at the back of her head. She reached out and touched the back of her head with a pained expression. It was fucking swollen. Jingyu silently propped herself up and sat up. Then, she looked at where she was now. She was in a shabby, thatched hut. The hut was wet, and she was lying on the dry straw that was obviously freshly made. What the hell is this place? Jingyu muttered silently. Just as she was about to stand up, the wooden door was suddenly pushed open. A dark figure appeared in front of Jingyu. "It's you." When Jingyu saw the person who had appeared, a murderous look appeared in her eyes. She looked at the man who had walked in with vigilance. Her eyes were filled with coldness. Chapter 1386. The man who was holding the firewood was dressed in black. He was also looking at Jingyu with a pair of cold eyes. There was a hideous scar on his face that went from the bridge of his nose down to his neck. It spread from her face to her neck, and then it was hidden under her clothes. How could Jingyu not recognize the person in front of her? The scar on his face was left behind by a silver arrow. This person was Nailin Yu's capable shadow guard, Shadow. When the shadow guard saw that Jingyu had woken up, he pursed his lips and looked at Jingyu. Then, he lowered his head and took out a jade pendant. Jingyu looked at the jade pendant in Shadow's hand, and her eyes widened. Xiao Chen's jade pendant. Wasn't it in Lu Miaoqiu's hands? Why is it with you? Jingyu was slightly surprised. Last time, she was still looking for the jade pendant. Jingyu had given it to Lu Miaoqiu as a wedding gift. Now, this jade pendant had appeared in Shadow's hands. The crown princess gave it to me. Shadow heard Jingyu's question and slowly said, "The crown princess said that if I took out this jade pendant, I would be able to gain the 9th Imperial Concubine's trust." Jingyu looked at Shadow with a strange expression. She slowly reached out and took the jade pendant from Shadow's hand. Then, she looked up at Shadow and said, "Aren't you Nailin Yu's shadow guard? Why are you here?" Shadow heard Jingyu's words and slightly froze. Then he said, I've already been abandoned by my original owner. I am now an ownerless object. Nalan doesn't want you anymore? Jingyu's eyes were filled with astonishment. This person had done so many things for Nalan. No matter what it was, he was willing to do anything. Those dirty things that couldn't be seen by others, he was willing to do them. And now, Nalan didn't want him anymore? If Nalan didn't want you, she would have killed you. After all, you know too many things. Why didn't she kill you? Why did she allow you to interact with Miaoqiao? Jingyu's eyes were filled with confusion. After Nalan abandoned me, she sent people to kill me. I tried my best to escape, but in the end, I was saved by the crown princess. I know that I am a dirty object and not worthy of serving another owner. So, I only promised the crown princess one thing to repay her for saving my life. That was to save you, the 9th imperial concubine. So it's like that. After hearing the shadow's explanation, Jingyu nodded her head in understanding. She slowly relaxed the vigilance in her heart. She watched as the shadow lit up the bonfire and handed over the water. Then, she slowly lowered her head. How would you save me? Jingyu's eyes were filled with confusion. She blinked and asked, After following the original master into the sacred clan, I have been hiding in the dark until the moment you, the 9th imperial concubine, were burned. Then, I tied up a strange woman to replace you. The shadow said it simply, as if there was no explanation. However, Jingyu felt her heart tremble. She knew that this person in front of her was terrifying. His martial arts were worthy of being a shadow guard. Since you have been hiding in the shadows, do you know what happened to Xiao Chen? Jingyu seemed to have suddenly thought of something. Her eyes were filled with surprise as she looked at the shadow and asked. The shadow looked at Jingyu strangely when she heard this. Chapter 1387. I don't know. The shadow slowly spat out these two words. Jingyu's heart, which had been filled with joy, once again relaxed. Jingyu's emotions once again dropped. She took a deep breath, looked around, and asked, Then where are we now? Where are we going? I'll send you to the crown princess side. My mission is complete. The shadow slightly lowered his head and said, Right now, we're outside the forest outside the Holy Family. 9th Imperial Concubine, rest for a bit. We'll set off in a bit. I'll wait for you outside. There's no need for that. Let's go, Jingyu said as she stood up and stared at the shadow. Okay. The shadow nodded and reached out to take a large robe from the shelf. He said, There are too many people around. Put on. Jingyu looked at the large robe that Yi handed over. She lowered her eyes and put it on. Her eyes were expressionless. The hut was empty. Jingyu and the shadow quickly walked forward. It wasn't until the shadow brought Jingyu to a dock and snuck onto a merchant ship that Jingyu realized that the Holy Family was on a small island. The island was very wide. The palace of the Holy Family was on a hill in the middle of the island. The members of the Holy Family were scattered all over the island. Shadow? Are you still called Shadow? Jingyu was wearing a large black robe and a black veil hat. She slightly tilted her head to look at the shadow and asked in confusion, You can call me anything you want. The shadow didn't seem to have much of an expression or emotion. He just stood quietly beside Jingyu in a protective manner. This scene made Jingyu's eyes contract slightly. She really didn't understand if Nalan was really retarded. She actually didn't treat such a good shadow guard well. Shadow, do you hate Nalan? Jingyu slowly turned her head and asked the shadow. I don't hate him. The shadow slowly shook his head. Why? She treated you like that and wanted to kill you. Don't you hate her? Jingyu looked at Yi with interest. Master is master. No matter what you do, you are master. The shadow said quietly, Dying for my master is what I should do. Whatever my master does to me is what I should do. The shadow's words were so stiff, but it made Jingyu laugh. You hate her. Jingyu firmly spat out these words. Her lips curled into a faint smile as she said, If you didn't hate her, then you wouldn't be alive right now. You would be willing to die at Nalan Yu's hands. I will. The shadow slowly lowered his head and said, The original master has already abandoned me. From now on, I am free. Jingyu looked at the side of the shadow's face and revealed a faint smile. She didn't say anything. She turned her head and looked at the island getting further and further away. She looked at the Holy Family getting further and further away from her. She slowly narrowed her eyes. Right now, in everyone's eyes, she must be dead, right? Jingyu slightly curled the corners of her lips. She looked up at the blue sky and suddenly felt as if her heart had opened up. In her life, there wasn't just Xiao Chun. There were many, many people in her life. Holy Family, when I, Jingyu, come back, it will be the day your Holy Family will be destroyed. Jingyu looked at everyone and slowly curled the corners of her lips. The smile in her eyes was very obvious, but the words she said were very ordinary. Chapter 1388. It sounded like a joke, but it also sounded like a casual remark. However, Jingyu was actually making a vow in her heart. This was the second time that Jingyu had seen the sea. She lowered her head slightly and leaned against the railing. Looking at the sparkling sea, the smile in Jingyu's eyes suddenly froze. The expression on her face changed. She suddenly felt that every corner of this world was filled with countless memories of Xiao Chun. Shadow, do you like the sea? Jingyu's expression was slightly absent-minded for a moment before she suddenly asked. I don't know. Shadow was silent for a moment before it slowly spat out these three words. When Jingyu heard Shadow's answer, she suddenly turned her head and saw Shadow frowning. It seemed that Shadow was really thinking about Jingyu's question. Looking at Shadow's appearance, Jingyu suddenly felt that it was funny. Do you want to know if you like it or not? Jingyu suddenly straightened her back and slightly arched her eyebrows as she winked at Shadow. What? Shadow was stunned when it heard Jingyu's words. Before Shadow could react, Shadow's wrist was suddenly grabbed by Jingyu. Shadow was slightly shocked, and its body suddenly fell towards the boat. Let's go down. Jingyu smiled and shouted. Then, she pulled the Shadow and jumped into the sea. Splash! When Jingyu and Shadow fell into the water, the people on the boat seemed to have heard the commotion and turned their heads. However, they didn't see anything. They thought that someone had fallen into the sea and hurriedly leaned against the railing to look down. However, what they saw was a sea without any abnormalities. The sea was calm without any waves. If someone had fallen into the sea, there should have been a cry for help. Since there was no cry or abnormality, they should have seen wrongly. That person shook his head helplessly and turned his head back. At this moment, Jingyu, who was dressed in black, was swimming nimbly at the bottom of the sea. After such a long time, she came into contact with the sea again. This feeling was so comfortable. Jingyu slightly raised the corner of her mouth and looked at Shadow. Shadow held its breath and looked at Jingyu's swimming movements. Just as it was about to say something, it suddenly saw something on the surface of the sea. Shadow was slightly shocked. When it was about to draw its sword, Xiao Chun shook his head and stopped it. In the deep sea, Jingyu's eyes flashed with a scorching light. Then, something strange happened. Shadow saw countless fish swimming in from all directions and then circling around them. They even showed their white bellies in front of Shadow. Shadow's eyes widened slightly as it saw a huge figure appear behind Jingyu. Its heart trembled slightly. However, it saw that this big guy was happily wagging its tail under Jingyu's palm. It startled all the small fish and scattered them. Jingyu waved her hand towards Z and pulled Z onto the back of the huge fish. They started to swim at the bottom of the sea. After coming out of the water for a split second, Jingyu and Z took a deep breath and dived into the water once again. Ha ha ha! Jingyu and the Shadow were getting further and further away from the ship. They were moving around in all directions, occasionally diving into the water. The Shadow was surprised at first, but now her eyes were full of light. Chapter 1389. She tilted her head and looked at Jingyu. When she saw the bright smile in Jingyu's eyes, her expression softened and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. How is it? Can you tell me now? Do you like the sea? Jingyu asked the Shadow with a smile as she rode the dolphin. Yes. The Shadow nodded slightly and said, I like it. Ha ha ha. I knew you would like it. Jingyu laughed loudly. Her laughter was very pleasant to the ears. The shadow and Jingyu played on the surface of the sea and scrupulously and swam freely on the seabed. Then, in the middle of the night, they accurately found the boat that they had jumped off. Taking advantage of the night, they climbed up the rope on the boat silently. Shoo! Lower your voice. Jingyu turned slightly and made a shushing gesture to the shadow. Her sneaky behavior made the shadow, for some reason, want to laugh when she saw Jingyu's behavior. Jingyu held a nervous heart and jumped onto the deck of the boat. After looking around to make sure that no one was around, she waved at the shadow. The shadow also jumped onto the deck of the boat. Jingyu's action warmed the shadow's heart. Seeing Jingyu take the initiative to take the lead, which looked like she was protecting her, the shadow's expression changed slightly. She bowed slightly to Jingyu, and the two returned to their respective rooms. Jingyu's body smelled like salt. Of course, she had to take a bath before she could rest. Jingyu had just finished her bath when she suddenly felt the boat shake. Her expression changed slightly. She raised her hand and put on her clothes. What's wrong? Jingyu frowned slightly and walked out of the room. When she saw the shadow come out, she frowned slightly and asked, I don't know. The shadow shook his head slightly and said, You rest first. I'll go take a look. Jingyu nodded slightly. She watched the shadow turn around and leave. She shook her head slightly and returned to her room. She hadn't sat down for long when she heard a cry of surprise from outside. The expression on Jingyu's face changed rapidly. Then, she abruptly opened the door. The shadow was about to knock on the door with his hand raised. What's happening outside? Could be the Jade Belt Pirates. Jingyu's expression turned ugly as she looked at the shadow with a conflicted expression. Yes. The shadow nodded silently when he heard Jingyu's words. Fuck, are they really pirates? Jingyu's mouth twitched fiercely. She said angrily, Yuan Mingyuan didn't come back to be a pirate again, did he? Let's go take a look. The shadow stood in place with a conflicted expression. Looking at Jingyu's excited expression, the corners of his mouth twitched. He silently followed behind Jingyu and walked outside. This merchant ship was now in a mess because of encountering pirates. There were shouts everywhere. Jingyu then saw two ships approaching Jingyu's ship. The shouts from their mouths made Jingyu frown. These pirates were really something. If they didn't shout, they wouldn't think they were pirates. What were they shouting for? Jingyu stood in place for a long time, but she didn't see any familiar faces. She frowned slightly and suddenly felt that she was overthinking. This part of the sea was different from the part of the sea where Xiao Chun and Jingyu went before. Chapter 1390. How did she meet Yuan Mingyuan? Moreover, Yuan Mingyuan should be with Hellion Theo and the others. What's the situation now? Jingyu sighed deeply and immediately lost interest. She watched as the pirates shot arrows at the ship and ordered the ship to stop. Jingyu pursed her lips slightly. Seeing the ship stop, no one dared to move. Then, she watched as the legendary pirate jumped onto the ship and ordered the people to take out the valuable items. Fortunately, these pirates were robbers. Looking at the piled-up treasures, Jingyu's mouth twitched fiercely. If she knew there were so many treasures on this ship, she would have stolen them first. Now it was snatched away by others. Jingyu sighed deeply, turned her head, and walked in the other direction. Just as she was about to go somewhere else, she was suddenly stopped by a voice. Hey, you two, hurry up and take out all the valuable items. Jingyu paused slightly and looked at the approaching person. Her mouth twitched fiercely. Seeing the person take out a sack and hand it to Jingyu, Jingyu frowned slightly. She blinked and looked at the person in front of her and asked, Are you talking to me? Nonsense, if I'm not talking to you. Who am I talking to? The man had a ferocious appearance. When he saw Jingyu wearing a veil, he frowned slightly. Why was she wearing a veil in the middle of the night? Oh! Jingyu nodded her head in understanding. She smiled brightly at the person in front of her and said, But I don't have money. What should I do? Why don't you give me some? What the fuck did you say? When the person heard Jingyu's words, he was slightly stunned. Then he pulled out a big knife from his waist and raised his hand to place it on Jingyu's neck. The shadow behind her frowned slightly when he saw this scene. I say, You pirates are really something. Jingyu turned her head slightly and looked at the large blade on her neck. She frowned in displeasure and said, "If you have something to say, say it properly. Why do you have to use a blade when everything is fine?" Just as the person was about to speak, his body trembled violently. His face was full of shock. Then he silently lowered his head and saw an arrow piercing his heart from behind. Jingyu was about to break the man's hand, but before she could do so, she saw an arrow piercing through the man's heart. Then the man's body slowly fell to the ground. Jingyu was slightly stunned. When she looked up, she saw a big ship approaching Jingyu's ship. Arrows were released towards the pirates on Jingyu's ship. Fuck, it's the Dragon Crown Prince's men again. Run. Jingyu heard someone call out to her amidst the panicked shouts. Dragon Prince? Prince. Jingyu's eyes were full of confusion. Just as Jingyu was puzzled, she saw the ships approaching Jingyu's ship. The pirates all fled in one direction. Their panicked appearance surprised Jingyu. What kind of person had such great ability to make these pirates tremble in fear? Where did these monkeys come from? When Jingyu slightly raised her head, she heard the shouts of the people around her. She saw agile monkeys on the ship, swinging the ropes on the ship and throwing themselves onto the ship. Chapter 1391. Is everyone all right? Jingyu looked at the monkeys, and for some reason, her heart suddenly trembled. Her eyes revealed a slight look of astonishment. The captain's question sounded in her ears, but Jingyu didn't pay attention to it. Her eyes were fixed on the approaching ship. Dragon Prince. Thank you, Dragon Prince, for saving our lives. When the ship got closer, Jingyu could clearly see the man in black standing at the bow of the ship with a longbow on his back. He should be called a boy. The boy was dressed in black and carried a longbow on his back. He stood at the bow of the ship, and his expression did not change at all. He looked at these people and nodded slightly before turning to leave. There was a group of adults following behind the boy. The moment Jingyu saw the boy, her eyes widened and she froze on the spot. Xiao Bai. Jingyu slowly called out these words. The man who had just turned around to leave suddenly froze. Then, he turned around with a face full of shock. His pitch-black eyes immediately saw Jingyu, who was dressed in black and had a veil over her face, standing among the people on the ship. The moment Xiao Bai saw Jingyu, his eyes widened and he revealed a look of surprise. Under everyone's shocked gazes, the Dragon Prince, who was always expressionless, actually rushed towards the ship in front of him. Mother! Under everyone's shocked gazes, Xiao Bai actually spat out these words that made everyone's legs go soft, and they almost knelt down. Xiao Bai, it's really you. Jingyu's eyes were filled with surprise. She reached out and caught Xiao Bai, who was rushing over. She hugged Xiao Bai tightly in her arms. Her eyes were filled with surprise. Xiao Bai hugged Jingyu tightly and started crying. Whoa, I miss your mother so much. Xiao Bai buried his head in Jingyu's embrace and sobbed softly. You've already grown so big. Jingyu patted Xiao Bai's back and said emotionally, Mother misses you too. This scene completely shocked everyone. Shadow's eyes widened and his mouth twitched. Looking at Qinbai's appearance, he was at least in his teens. Jingyu, who wasn't even 20 years old, actually had a teenage son. Wait a minute, let me calm down. Why do I feel like the world has been turned upside down? The corners of the Shadow's mouth twitched. The people on the ship were all stunned. They didn't know what was going on. On the other side, the people on Xiao Bai's ship were stunned for a moment. Then, a look of surprise appeared in their eyes. It's the Dragon Prince's mother. Those people looked as if they already knew. Xiao Bai, how have you been? Jingyu and Xiao Bai hugged for a long time. Only then did Jingyu let go of her hand and carefully look at Xiao Bai. Her face hidden behind the black veil was filled with worry as she asked, Mother, I've been very good. Xiao Bai looked at Jingyu proudly and said, Look, I can protect myself. I can also protect others. His proud expression made Jingyu smile. She reached out and patted Xiao Bai's head. Only then did she realize that Xiao Bai had grown so tall. A slight warmth appeared in her eyes. She had said that she would come and pick him up, but she didn't expect the delay to be so long. Chapter 1392. Mother, what are you doing here? Xiaobai was no longer the wild child he used to be. He had seen a lot of things, and when he saw Jingyu's outfit, he immediately understood what was going on. Mother, let's go. Let's talk on the boat. Xiaobai turned around and looked at Jingyu. Okay. Jingyu nodded and smiled at Xiaobai. She followed Xiaobai on his boat. When Jingyu, Xiaobai, and the shadow sat in the room, Jingyu raised her hand and took off the veil on her face, revealing her beautiful face and a pair of golden-green eyes. How could Xiaobai not be familiar with Jingyu's eyes? Xiaobai, is this your boat? Jingyu looked at Xiaobai and asked. Yes, it's mine. Xiaobai looked at Jingyu with eyes full of affection. Without saying a word, he threw himself into Jingyu's arms. The way he rubbed against Jingyu was exactly the same as before. Jingyu's eyes shone with warmth as she raised her hand and patted Xiaobai's head. You're already so old, yet you still act like this. What a joke. Jingyu's eyes were full of affection. Oomph. If anyone dares to say anything bad, I'll teach them a lesson. Xiaobai's eyes were full of ruthlessness. When Jingyu heard Xiaobai's words, she smiled helplessly and said, Then the people outside are all your people? Yes. When Xiaobai heard Jingyu's question, he slowly sat up and looked at Jingyu and said, They are all my brothers, my subordinates. They were originally pirates on the sea, but I subdued them to maintain the peace of the sea. Just like today. Xiaobai looked at Jingyu with a smile and said, Mother, I did what I said. Now I can protect myself, and I can also protect others. Yes, very good. Jingyu's eyes were tinged with a faint smile. She raised her hand and patted Xiaobai's head. Her eyes were full of warmth. The two sat on the ship and talked for a long time. Only then did Jingyu know what Xiaobai was doing on the sea. Originally, he followed Big Brother Fong to do the escort business. But later, he was tossed around by the pirates, and many things happened. In a fit of anger, Xiaobai started a fight with these pirates. He didn't expect that this fight wouldn't stop. Xiaobai had become the overlord of the seas and had conquered the entire 5 prefectures bay. Now, he was sailing everywhere. These subordinates were all subdued by Xiaobai and were willing to stay by his side. They didn't mind that Xiaobai was just a child. Big Brother Fong was still guarding the 5 prefectures bay, while Xiaobai was wandering outside. This was the last place Xiaobai was prepared to go to. After arriving here, he was ready to return. He didn't expect to be so lucky to meet Jingyu here. When Jingyu heard Xiaobai's words, she let out a deep sigh. When Xiaobai asked her why she was here, Jingyu didn't explain in detail. She only gave a vague answer, as if she didn't want Xiaobai to know too much. Mother, on the deck, Jingyu raised her head slightly and looked at the monkeys that had fallen everywhere. She didn't expect that Xiaobai would bring these monkeys with him. Jingyu turned around and saw Xiaobai walking over. His small body was straight. The child who had been curled up in Jingyu's arms had grown so big now. His eyes were so handsome. Chapter 1393. Mother, what are you looking at? Xiaobai stood beside Jingyu. After a night, the sun was shining on the surface of the sea. Jingyu stood on the deck with her veil on and squinted her eyes. I'm looking at the sea. Jingyu smiled at Xiaobai and said, I didn't expect Xiaobai to have grown so big. It's already been so long. Xiaobai muttered. Then, as if he thought of something, he carefully looked at Jingyu and asked, Mother, where's Father? Why don't I see Father with you? Jingyu suddenly heard Xiaobai's words, and her heart trembled. She clenched her fists and said, I'm going to look for him now. Oh. Xiaobai looked at Jingyu's reaction and clenched his fists. He didn't ask any more questions. Jingyu saw that Xiaobai didn't ask any more questions and secretly let out a sigh of relief. She turned her head away. Crown Prince, someone is coming. Just as Jingyu and Xiaobai were standing on the deck, the sound of hurried footsteps suddenly came from behind them. Jingyu saw Xiaobai's expression instantly change when he saw Xiaobai, who was originally standing obediently beside her, waiting for them. Who is it? Xiaobai's black clothes made Jingyu's heart tighten. If this subordinate didn't see wrongly, it's the group of people who ran away last night. The man looked at Xiao Bai and frowned. "Humph, I let them go last night. I didn't expect them to come knocking on my door today." Xiao Bai's expression was incomparably cold. His dark eyes were filled with ferocity. He turned to look at the man and said, "Tell the brothers to prepare for battle." "Yes." The man bowed and quickly walked to the side. "Mother, I'll be back soon." As Xiao Bai walked away, he turned his head slightly to the side and gave Jingyu a resplendent smile. Then he left just like that. Jingyu stood in place and raised her eyebrows slightly. Looking at Xiao Bai's back, a faint smile appeared on her face. She didn't know why, but when she saw Xiao Bai like this, Jingyu suddenly felt like she was looking at Xiao Chun. It was like she was looking at a miniature version of Xiao Chun. He was cold and indifferent to everyone, but when he turned to look at her, he smiled. Jingyu's eyes slightly lowered. Unfortunately, the current Xiao Chun, whether it was to her or others, he was cold and indifferent to her. "Is he really your son?" After holding back the words for an entire night, Shadow finally saw Xiao Bai leave. He silently swallowed his saliva and looked at Jingyu with a conflicted expression. "Yes." Jingyu smiled and nodded confidently. She said, "He is my son, the son of Xiao Chun and I." When Jingyu said this sentence naturally, a faint smile appeared in her eyes. However, the bitterness in her heart instantly filled Jingyu's heart. Her and Xiao Chen's son. Jingyu's eyes were slightly sour. She suddenly thought of the scene in Jinling City. It was clearly something that happened not long ago, but now it made Jingyu's heart ache. Was it something that happened in her memory? Chapter 1394. They originally had a child, but how could it be gone? Jingyu's heart trembled fiercely. Nailing you, are you okay?" The shadow saw that Jingyu's face was slightly pale and suddenly frowned, looking at Jingyu as he asked, "I'm fine." Jingyu took a deep breath and stood firm. She raised her hand and waved away the shadow's hand that reached out to support her. She didn't look at the shadow and turned to leave with a cold face. When the shadow saw Jingyu's action, his hand froze in place. It was as if he felt Jingyu's disgust. The shadow could almost guess that Jingyu must have thought of nailing you, which is why she had such a reaction. Jingyu sat peacefully in the bedroom with her eyes slightly closed, not moving at all until she felt the ship shake. At first, it was only a slight shake, but after a while, the shaking became more and more intense, and even the sound of collision could be heard. Jingyu's sitting body slowly stood up, and she raised her hand to take the gauze hat and put it on. When she came to the wide deck outside, she also heard the sounds of shouting. The scene in front of her was a little chaotic. Xiao Bai's ship was surrounded by 4 or 5 small ships, and now Xiao Bai was fighting with these people. The arrows that were shot out and the figures that rushed up were all killed one by one. After so long, this was the first time that Jingyu saw Xiao Bai in battle. He was dressed in black and stood at the bow of the ship. He held an arrow in his hand and shot it as if he didn't know what fatigue was. That pair of pitch-black eyes flashed with a moving light. The gaze of the Manor Lord caused Jingyu to be slightly shocked. In Xiao Bai's eyes, there was a murderous aura. The arrows that were shot out were mixed with an incomparably strong and violent aura, and they easily pierced through the heart of another person. It was flawless. Jingyu's eyes flashed with a strong sense of surprise. Then, she slowly narrowed her eyes and looked at the chaotic battle in front of her. "We've reached an impasse." Unknowingly, the shadow appeared behind Jingyu. He looked at Xiao Bai with surprise in his eyes. He squinted his eyes and looked at Jingyu, asking, "Aren't you going to help him?" "There's no need." Jingyu slowly curled her lips and said, "We'll just watch." The shadow looked at Jingyu's unworried expression and raised his eyebrows slightly. Then, he calmly stood beside Jingyu and looked at the situation in front of him. Just as Jingyu and the shadow were having fun watching the battle, they saw Xiao Bai instantly give the order to change the situation of the battle. On this battlefield, Xiao Bai changed from being passive to active. Those arrogant monkeys played their biggest role, and almost all the ships on the other side were thrown into chaos. Jingyu looked at Xiao Bai's almost tyrannical methods, and a faint smile appeared in her eyes. He's really like Xiao Chun. Jing Yu's face instantly froze when this thought appeared in her mind. This kind of momentary longing seemed to have become a habit that was hard to get rid of. Jing Yu clearly did not want to think about it. However, she couldn't help but think about it again and again. Jing Yu slowly lowered her head. Xiao Bai's victory was a foregone conclusion, and there seemed to be nothing more to see. However, just as Jing Yu turned to leave, the sound of musical instruments suddenly rang out on the battlefield. Chapter 1395. This sound, Jing Yu's face suddenly turned pale. Her eyes were filled with fear as she looked in the direction of the music. On the opposite ship, the sound of musical instruments was coming from somewhere. How could Jing Yu not be familiar with this music? The tone was so pleasant to the ears, but the moment Jing Yu heard this music, she suddenly felt as if she had fallen into an ice cellar. Sound attack. Jing Yu's lips were trembling as she spat out these two words. The expression on the Shadow's face also changed. This situation, which was originally going to be a one-sided situation, suddenly fell into a short silence because of the sudden sound of music. Then, under everyone's strange gazes, something seemed to appear on the calm surface of the sea, swimming over and over again in the deep sea. It's a vicious shark. Just as everyone was frightened by this, a sharp-eyed person suddenly saw a sharp, triangular thing on the surface of the sea and immediately cried out in panic. After this person's voice fell, everyone's eyes were filled with shock. What's going on? What happened? Why is the vicious shark here? Look, that vicious shark is swimming towards us. What's going on? Who's controlling this vicious shark? The eyes of the people on Xiao Bai's ship were filled with astonishment. The panicked voice rang out, waking everyone on the bed. At this moment, arrogant laughter rang out from the opposite ship. Ha, what dragon prince? In my eyes, he's just a fart. On the opposite ship, the middle-aged man standing on the bow of the ship was filled with arrogance and resentment. Now let's see how your dragon prince will deal with this. That person's pair of pitch-black eyes stared at Xiao Bai and said, "Aren't you just a brat who's still wet behind the ears? How dare you call yourself the Dragon Prince of the Sea? Fuck you." The man laughed arrogantly and said, "Today, I'll show you what it means to be the overlord of the sea." Under the man's shout, the vicious sharks rammed into Xiao Bai's ship. The music was still ringing out. The vicious sharks avoided the smaller ships and rammed into Xiao Bai's ship. Ha ha! The middle-aged man patiently looked at Xiao Bai's ashen face and suddenly laughed arrogantly. If it wasn't for the help of an expert, he wouldn't have dared to bring such a small group of people to challenge Xiao Bai today. Originally, he just wanted to take a gamble, but he didn't expect that he really had such ability. It was really amazing. Xiao Bai ordered his men to stabilize the situation as he commanded his men to continue attacking. Jing Yu stood behind Xiao Bai, and all she could hear was the magical music. Jing Yu closed her eyes tightly. When she opened them again, her golden-green eyes were shining with an amazing light. The music was still there, but it had no effect on Jing Yu. The music that was transmitted to her ears had no effect other than familiarity. Jing Yu slowly lowered her eyes after the initial real gold. The music wasn't targeted at her, and in Jing Yu's ears, the control of the music was so weak that Jing Yu felt that it could be ignored. She thought of the music that had entered her ears during the battle outside Jinling City. Chapter 1396. The power of control was like an invisible hand clutching Jing Yu's heart. Jing Yu didn't even dare to resist. However, today's music was so different. It seemed like she hadn't cultivated it to perfection. Jing Yu narrowed her eyes slightly and adjusted her breathing and heartbeat in an instant. She slowly straightened her body and walked toward Xiao Bai step by step. Just as Jing Yu was about to take a step, Xiao Bai's group froze. Some people around Xiao Bai were stunned when they saw Jing Yu's actions. Some of them wanted to stop Jing Yu, as if they wanted to tell Jing Yu that there was danger ahead. However, at this moment, Xiao Bai turned his head as if he felt something. "Mother!" Xiao Bai saw Jing Yu walking over and froze for a moment. Then, he lowered his head and looked at Jing Yu as if he was very afraid. He said, "I'm sorry, Mother. I've disappointed you, silly child." Jingyu heard Xiao Bai's words and patted his head. She said, "That person isn't someone you can deal with. That person is Mother's enemy." Enemy? Xiao Bai's expression turned cold when he heard Jingyu's words. He frowned and looked at Jingyu. He asked, "Mother, did they hurt you?" "No." Jingyu curled her lips and said, "Tell your people to leave." "Okay, everyone leave." Xiao Bai didn't hesitate and immediately ordered everyone to leave after Jingyu's words. Dragon Prince. Xiao Bai's subordinates were shocked when they heard Xiao Bai's words. Just as they were about to say something, they saw Xiao Bai's cold gaze and slowly lower their heads. "Yes." Everyone took a step back and looked at Jingyu with scrutinizing eyes. Jingyu seemed to feel everyone's gazes. She lowered her eyes and didn't say a word. Then, she turned and walked away. Just a mere sound attack. How dare you show off when you haven't mastered it at all? Jingyu stood at the bow of the ship. Her golden green eyes were covered by the black veil, and no one could see them. They were shining with a resplendent light. "Leave." Jingyu's clear voice sounded. Everyone's eyes were filled with confusion. "Leave? What leave?" What was Jingyu telling him to back off? Everyone's eyes were filled with confusion. They looked at each other and didn't know what was going on. Just as everyone was confused, Xiao Bai and the Shadow couldn't help but look at the sea. They saw with their own eyes that a vicious shark was rushing over and seemed to want to hit Xiao Bai's ship. However, just as Jingyu's word sounded, the vicious shark strangely stopped. It was as if it was frozen in place. It wasn't just one vicious shark, but all of the vicious sharks. The ferocious sharks strangely stopped. Xiao Bai's eyes flickered. Everyone suddenly felt this strange situation. Why did the ferocious shark stop? "Look, look!" One of them suddenly cried out in surprise and said in horror, "Look at that vicious shark. It's going back." Oh my God! Everyone saw that the vicious shark that was attacking them was swimming toward the ship. Suddenly, everyone's eyes were filled with shock. Chapter 1397. While she was washing her face, the music that was reverberating on the surface of the sea became louder and louder. There was a hint of anxiety in the music, and in the midst of this anxiety, there were even a few wrong notes. What's going on? What's going on?" The middle-aged man on the opposite side, who had a smug look on his face just a second ago, suddenly had a drastic change in expression when he saw the vicious sharks swimming towards his ship. "Xiao Bai, give me the bow and arrow." Jingyu looked at this scene without any expression in her eyes as she tilted her head slightly and said to Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai raised his hand and handed the bow and arrow in his hand to Jingyu. He watched as Jingyu slowly drew the longbow, and then heard the music suddenly stop. From the opposite ship, a person staggered out. What is this?" The person's face was very young, and his eyes were filled with shock as he looked towards Xiao Bai's ship. The moment he looked over, he saw Jingyu standing at the bow of the ship with a longbow in her hand. She was dressed in black, and her face was covered with a black veil, which clearly covered almost all of Jingyu's face. But the moment the man looked over, his eyes were filled with shock. It's an abnormal pupil." Almost at the same time the man opened his mouth to speak, Jingyu suddenly released an arrow from the longbow in her hand, accurately piercing the young man's heart. Hiss! The moment Jingyu released the arrow, everyone standing behind Qin Bai instantly widened their eyes and sucked in a breath of cold air. What accurate archery! Those people can't live. Jingyu lowered her eyes slightly, looked sideways at Xiao Bai, and asked, "Can I kill them?" "Yes." When Xiao Bai heard Jingyu's question, he blinked slightly, and then the corners of his mouth curled up into a bright smile as he replied, "That's good." After Jingyu heard Xiao Bai's answer, the corners of her mouth curled up into a happy smile. If the scene just now had frightened everyone, then the next scene would have made everyone fall into a state of panic. After Jingyu and Xiao Bai's conversation ended, everyone suddenly saw something strange on the surface of the sea. What is that? Everyone looked up at the strange sea in the distance, and narrowed their eyes slightly. "It looks like vicious sharks." After a person's exclamation, everyone saw the vicious sharks that were gathering from all directions rapidly approaching them. They looked at the triangle on the surface of the sea from afar. There were at least hundreds and thousands of these vicious sharks. Everyone's eyes widened at this moment. The fear in their eyes was so obvious. "Those vicious sharks are coming towards us." Everyone looked at the vicious sharks that were rapidly approaching, and their faces were filled with fear. Their eyes widened, and they clenched the weapons in their hands tightly as they swallowed slightly. What should we do?" Everyone swallowed slightly, and when they looked at the people next to them, they realized that the people next to them were also nervous. Looking at the vicious sharks approaching bit by bit, their legs and stomachs trembled uncontrollably from nervousness, and they swallowed fiercely. Just when everyone was ready to see the vicious sharks approaching with their own eyes, something completely unexpected happened. Chapter 1398. When those vicious sharks arrived in front of them, they actually bypassed their ship. That's right, they bypassed them. The sharks directly bypassed Xiao Bai's ship in batches and fiercely rushed to the other side of the ship. The eyes of the people on the other ship were filled with fear as they looked at the approaching sharks and cried out. Under their cries, those vicious sharks didn't stop at all and directly overturned those ships. "Let's go." Jingyu saw the ferocious look of those vicious sharks with her own eyes. Without any obstruction, she lowered her head, turned around, and calmly walked back to the house behind her. The people standing on the boat all turned their heads when they saw Jingyu's action. It seemed that, just after Jingyu told them to retreat, then the situation changed drastically. Just because of Jingyu, how did Jingyu do it? Everyone trembled violently as they looked at Jingyu's back. They didn't know why, but at this moment, they looked at Jingyu with an unnatural gaze. It was as if they suddenly understood how Xiao Bai could be so powerful. So, it was because he had such a powerful mother. She could actually command the vicious sharks. The surface of the sea was in a mess. The few ships that had gathered around Xiao Bai's ship were all destroyed under everyone's gaze. The people on the ships had all become food for the vicious sharks. There were hundreds and thousands of vicious sharks swimming around the ship, but not a single vicious shark touched their ship. Xiao Bai's subordinates stared at the vicious sharks with vigilant eyes, but they didn't expect that these vicious sharks would really swim away calmly after eating and drinking to their heart's content. They didn't seem to be interested in their ship at all. Dragon Prince, Jingyu, Xiao Bai, and the others had already returned to their rooms. When they heard the call, they blinked in confusion and turned to look at the person who had rushed in. This person was called Jiang Xiaojun, and he was one of Xiao Bai's generals. At this moment, he rushed into the room with a look of surprise, attracting the attention of Jingyu, Xiao Bai, and the others. "What is it?" Xiao Bai raised his eyebrows slightly and asked Jiang Xiaojun. "Those vicious sharks have all left, and the people of Snakehead are all dead." Jiang Xiaojun swallowed his saliva and said. As he spoke, he looked at Jingyu with eyes full of fear. Xiao Bai nodded calmly. "I understand." Xiao Bai narrowed his eyes and said, "Don't tell anyone about what you saw today. Do you understand?" "Yes." When Jiang Xiaojun heard Xiao Bai's warning, he was slightly startled. Then, he nervously nodded and lowered his head. Xiao Bai waved his hand slightly, and Jiang Xiaojun left the room. Xiao Bai's tense expression only softened a little when he was facing his subordinates. He turned to look at Jingyu and asked worriedly, "Mother, what happened to your eyes?" "It's fine." Jingyu shook her head slightly and said, "It's just a change in color." When Xiao Bai heard Jingyu's words, he helplessly shook his head. Then he looked at Jingyu and said, "Mother, are you going to the Tokyo Imperial City? I'll give you a ride." "Okay." Jingyu nodded slightly. She looked at Xiao Bai's hesitant expression and smiled faintly. She raised her hand and patted Xiao Bai's head and said, "It's not that Mother doesn't want to take you with me, but right now, I can't protect you even if you follow me." Chapter 1399. Xiao Bai, give mother some time. Now is not the time. Jingyu sighed deeply and said, there are too many things waiting for me to do. Xiao Bai, I also need your help with something. Can you help me? Yes. Mother, tell me. When Xiao Bai heard Jingyu's words, a resolute expression appeared on his face. He stared at Jingyu with a moving gaze. Jingyu looked at Xiao Bai's expression and nodded happily. After so many battles and so many failures, I finally understand that I have always been relying on my eyes. Jingyu sighed deeply and said, the other pupils aren't invincible. Since when did I rely on my eyes so much? Jingyu laughed involuntarily as she spoke. Her eyes flickered as she slowly said, the Holy Family and the Poison Sect only rely on the aristocratic families and the people of Miaojiang. So, the only thing I can do now is give up on the other pupils. I want to use my own forces to fight against the Holy Family. Jingyu's eyes flickered as she spoke. She turned to look at Xiao Bai and said, the Holy Family exists on an island in the sea. In the future, I will definitely fight on the sea. So, Xiao Bai, I need you to help me. Jingyu arched her eyebrows as she looked at Xiao Bai and said, what you need to do is very simple. You need to become the king of the sea. You need to defeat the pirates and take over more and more forces. Become my support. Jingyu's golden-green eyes stared at Xiao Bai as she spoke. Mother, I understand. When Xiao Bai heard Jingyu's words, his eyes burned. Jingyu had said it so clearly. How could Xiao Bai not understand what she meant? Although he didn't know what Jingyu meant by the several defeats she mentioned, Xiao Bai was smart enough to understand. However, with Xiao Bai's intelligence, he had already guessed that Jingyu must have experienced something that made her say such words. Who dared to bully his mother? He deserved to die. The expression on Xiao Bai's face quickly changed, and he said firmly, Mother, don't worry. When you come back, I will be the overlord of the sea. We will definitely train an army that belongs to the sea for you. Okay, Jingyu looked up at Xiao Bai and said, I'm very happy to have a godson like you. Jingyu wasn't wrong about Xiao Bai. After talking to Jingyu, Xiao Bai became busy. Looking at the people training on the deck, they were all bandits, but why did they listen to Xiao Bai's words? Was this the respect for the strong? It had nothing to do with age or gender. It was only because this person was strong enough to conquer them. The corners of Jingyu's mouth revealed a faint smile. She stood at the door and watched Xiao Bai practice archery. She looked at the group of people who were also doing their own things. If she could live like this, it wouldn't be a bad thing to spend the rest of her life on the sea. Boss, we finally know how you learned your archery skills. When the onlookers saw how accurate and powerful Xiao Bai's arrows were, their eyes were filled with surprise as they said, it must have been Madam who taught you, right? That's right. Didn't you see the arrow Madam shot last time? Let me tell you, the way the arrow flew out, it was simply shocking. One of the soldiers exclaimed in horror. His words piqued everyone's curiosity. Chapter 1400. Yes, yes, yes. I saw it too. Another person quickly jumped out and said, do you know the posture of the madam when she pulls the bow? When I saw her drawing the bow, my legs went weak, let alone the arrow. That person said exaggeratedly, you don't know. Madam's murderous aura when she drew the bow, and her black robes were simply. That person thought for a long time, but couldn't think of an adjective. After a long time, he slapped his thigh and said, in any case, it's intimidating. Jingyu stood not far away and heard the words of these people very clearly. The corners of her mouth suddenly curled up into a faint smile. She didn't expect that just a casual arrow would help Xiao Bai win over people's hearts in an invisible way. We should go. Just as Jingyu was standing there thinking, the shadow turned his head slightly and said something, pulling Jingyu back from her thoughts. MHM, Jingyu nodded slowly. She turned her head and looked in the direction the shadow was looking at. A city appeared in the distance. Jingyu was familiar with this place. She didn't expect to return to this place after going around in circles. Yangzhou City. Jingyu was slightly dazed as she looked at the harbor that was gradually appearing. Back then, When Jingyu was chased out of the Tokyo Imperial City, she fled for thousands of miles to Jinling. After such a long time, she returned to this place again. She was once again taking the same path as when she was fleeing and returning to the Tokyo Imperial City. Jingyu's eyes were filled with mockery. Now, in everyone's eyes, she was already dead. It was so difficult to enter Yangzhou City back then, but now, it was as easy as entering an uninhabited land. Back then, she and Xiao Chun did everything they could to enter Yangzhou City. Jingyu only found out that Xiao Chun was the sect master of the Nether sect when they were in Yangzhou City. Looking at the dock getting closer and closer, Jingyu's expression was a little absent-minded. Bits and pieces of her time with Xiao Chun came to Jingyu's mind, and in an instant, the tip of Jingyu's nose turned sour. Back then, they had gone through fire and water countless times. But now, why had they become strangers? Mother, we're here. Jingyu suppressed her emotions. When she turned to look at Xiao Bai, she saw the worry in his eyes. Xiao Bai, do you still remember how I looked when I named you? Jingyu looked at Xiao Bai's eyes. Her eyes were filled with longing. She missed the various experiences on that deserted island. Jingyu, I remember. Xiao Bai nodded seriously and said, Father was the one who named me. Father said I wasn't called Xiao Bai, so I'll be called Xiao He. Huh? Hearing Xiao Bai's words, Jingyu seemed to recall what had happened back then. Her eyes were filled with amusement. There were many thrills on the desolate island, but there were also many interesting things. That's right, Xiao Bai. Jingyu looked at Xiao Bai and said happily, Xiao Chun gave you this name. Xiao Bai looked at Jingyu's expression and gaze. He pursed his lips slightly and looked at Jingyu as he asked, Mother, are you thinking of Father? Yes, I miss him a lot. Jingyu slowly lowered her eyes and looked at Xiao Bai as she said, When we return to the Tokyo Imperial City, I'll be able to see him. Xiao Bai blinked slightly and looked at Jingyu. Jingyu raised her hand and patted Xiao Bai's head without saying anything. Jingyu and Ying disembarked from the ship at the harbor. Xiao Bai and the others continued to sail toward 5 Prefectures Bay. Chapter 1401. Jingyu stood on the pier and looked at the boat that was moving away. She looked at Xiao Bai, who was standing at the bow of the boat and staring at her. Her mouth curved into a faint smile. Xiao Bai has really grown up. Let's go. Jingyu retracted her gaze and turned to walk into Yangzhou City. Seeing that Yangzhou City didn't seem to have changed much, her heart was filled with mixed feelings. She easily found an inn. This was the place where they used to live. After entering the inn, Jingyu washed up a little and went to sleep. Today, she will rest here for a day. Tomorrow, they will leave after buying a horse. Tokyo Imperial City. What is waiting for me in the Imperial City? Jingyu fell asleep. The long voyage on the sea didn't allow Jingyu to sleep well. The rocking of the ship was uncomfortable. Now that they were on land, she could finally have a good night's sleep. When Jingyu woke up, it was already dark. Jingyu was completely awakened by hunger. So hungry, Jingyu yawned and reluctantly got up to put on her clothes and prepare to go out to look for food. Jingyu opened the door and saw the shadow standing at the door. She slightly widened her eyes. The shadow silently withdrew the hand that was about to knock on the door and said faintly, I came to call you downstairs to eat. You really came at the right time. I am hungry. Jingyu blinked her eyes and looked at the shadow and said, Let's go. In the hall downstairs, Jingyu had eaten her fill and was sitting in the hall with nothing to do. She narrowed her eyes slightly and lay on the table, not wanting to move. Just as she was about to go upstairs to sleep, she heard the discussion at the next table. What? It's true. Fengju is going to play in the music house today. One of the men at the next table had a look of surprise in his eyes. His words attracted the attention of the people at the other tables. When they heard the man's words, their eyes were full of surprise. Of course it's true. I heard the people at the music house reveal the news with my own ears. The other man nodded again and said, But Fengju seems to think that it's too noisy, so he doesn't want people to watch. So you don't know, but now the music house's entrance is completely blocked. The entrance can't be entered, but there is no place to pass through the entrance. The man said exaggeratedly. Who is Fengju? Jingyu was interested. She slightly raised her eyebrows and asked this question. Suddenly, everyone's attention was attracted to her. Miss, it's obvious that you're not locals, right? Even Fengju doesn't know about it. The person who spoke first looked at Jingyu from head to toe and said, This young master is right. We're just passing through Yangzhou City. Jingyu lowered her head slightly and said to that person, I heard your conversation just now. It was very interesting. I wonder who this Fengju is to be so popular. This Fengju, she is the #1 beauty in Yangzhou City, and she plays the zither very well. To be able to listen to Fengju play a song, to be able to see Fengju's face, I can die without regrets. The man said with a sigh. The meaning in his words made Jingyu raise her eyebrows in surprise. When did such a person appear in Yangzhou City? When these words were said, Jingyu saw the people around her nodding their heads in agreement. They all looked like they worshipped this person called Fengju. Jingyu suddenly became interested. Chapter 1402. She turned to the shadow and said, It's so boring to stay in this inn. Why don't we go out for a walk? Okay. When the shadow heard Jingyu asking about Fengju, he knew what Jingyu was thinking. He calmly raised his eyebrows, stood up, and followed Jingyu to the street. Jingyu didn't need to ask where Fengju was because everyone on the street was running. She didn't need Jingyu to guess where they were running to. They were definitely going to look for Fengju. When Jingyu leisurely arrived at Fengju's music hall, there was already a sea of people at the entrance. Because the music hall didn't allow people to enter, these people blocked the entrance. Everyone wanted to get closer to the entrance so that they could hear the music coming from the music hall more clearly. Jingyu looked at this scene and was stunned. These people were really scary. What kind of person had such great ability? Jingyu turned to look at the shadow. Her gaze made the shadow's body tense up. What kind of gaze is this, shadow? You know Qigong, right? Jingyu looked at the shadow with a smile and asked. Yes. The shadow nodded. That's great. Come, fly me to the backyard. Let's find a good place to have a look. Jingyu said to the shadow after seeing the shadow nod. When the shadow heard Jingyu's words, his face suddenly twitched and he helplessly lowered his head. He knew that something bad was going to happen. In this music hall, compared to the chaos outside, it could be said to be incomparably quiet. There were only a dozen people sitting in the hall. But looking at the clothes of these people, it was obvious that they weren't ordinary people. They were definitely the kind that spent a lot of money. Jingyu calmly curled the corner of her mouth. Where were they now? On the roof beam. Jingyu and the shadow were squatting on the roof beam. They could clearly see everything that was happening on the stage from where they were. Moreover, no one would notice them. This place was simply a blind spot. Jingyu was full of admiration for the shadow. He could find a blind spot so casually. If it was her, she would find the best place to assassinate. However, she couldn't find a good place to hide. Jingyu and the shadow had just hidden themselves when they heard some movements coming from below. Jingyu slightly raised her eyebrows and sat down. She looked at the movements below. First, a woman came out and said something. She said that Fengju was going to play a song today and invited a few people to listen. Then, a figure slowly walked up from the side of the stage. The sound of her light footsteps and her light green clothes were elegant and beautiful. Her eyes were calm and tranquil, but they carried a sense of pride. She walked casually onto the stage with a zither in her hands. This scene was so familiar. Jingyu's eyes widened in an instant. This woman. Today's song, Seeking Grace, was composed by this little girl for my benefactor. I only hope that if my benefactor passes by Yangzhou City, he will be able to hear this song. The woman's body was petite, and her graceful body was very moving. Even the casual movement of sitting down was so seductive. Chapter 1403. This person was the famous Fengju in Yangzhou. When Fengju finished speaking, her eyes were filled with nostalgia. The zither was placed on her lap, and she was sitting on the ground. Jingyu looked at this scene and slowly pursed her lips. Her eyes were filled with memories of the past. At that time, she and Xiao Chun had fled to Yangzhou City and met the World Music Club. This woman was now the most famous woman in the world. Jingyu clearly remembered what she looked like at that time. Jingyu's eyes were a little absent-minded. It was as if she saw the fat woman who stood on the stage. That fat woman did not have a beautiful appearance and was even ugly. However, her skill in playing the zither was something that Jingyu could not forget. Back then, she had helped Jingyu before she left. She did not expect that this woman would remember her kindness until now. When the woman went on stage, because she was fat, she sat on the chair and the chair collapsed. She sat on the ground and placed the zither on her lap. She played a moving zither sound. Now, her body was no longer fat, but she was no longer willing to sit on a chair. Just like before, she sat on the ground. The zither in her hand was placed on her lap, and she played a moving zither. The gratitude expressed from the zither was so obvious. Jingyu sat on the beam and listened attentively. In a trance, he saw the plump woman walking with great difficulty on the riverbank with her zither in her arms. She also seemed to see the woman standing on the riverbank, shouting and asking for the girl's name. When the zither sound stopped, Jingyu's eyes were filled with a faint smile. That smile was magnified little by little, but it made Jingyu laugh. The moment the zither sound stopped, the entire hall was incomparably silent. Jingyu's laughter could be said to be incomparably abrupt. When Jingyu laughed, the shadow's body froze. There was only one thought in his mind. Did Jingyu eat the wrong medicine? She actually laughed at this time. Jingyu's laughter alarmed Feng Ju, who was playing the zither. After so long, Feng Ju heard someone laugh after listening to his zither. Feng Ju looked up and seemed to be looking for the person who laughed. Then, he heard the laughter again. This time, he heard it clearly. The laughter came from above. Everyone looked up and saw the woman sitting on the beam. She was dressed in black and had a veil on her face. Her face could not be seen clearly. "Miss, your zither skills are really unparalleled in the world." Jingyu quietly sat on the beam. Her eyes that were hidden under the black veil looked at Feng Ju and said, "I did not expect that I would have the honor of hearing your zither music when I pass by Yangzhou City again." Clang! After Jingyu's words, Feng Ju's expression suddenly changed. When he suddenly stood up, the zither fell to the ground and made a loud sound. Feng Ju's pitch-black eyes stared closely at Jingyu. His eyes were filled with joy. Benefactor, Feng Ju's lips trembled slightly. He did not expect that he would meet Jingyu under such circumstances. The moment he heard Jingyu's words, Feng Ju's chest crazily filled with the memories of the past. "The words I said in the past have come true today. Miss, your elegance is unparalleled in the world. You deserve the title of Feng Ju." Jingyu's lips curved slightly. Her words made Feng Ju's tears fall like rain. Chapter 1404. You owe me nothing. This is what you deserve. Jingyu squatted on the roof beam and looked at Feng Ju. She then turned to the shadow and said, "If you don't run now, you won't have another chance. Benefactor, please wait." When Feng Ju saw that Jingyu was about to leave, a look of anxiety appeared in his eyes. He raised his voice to call out to Jingyu, but Jingyu ignored him. Under everyone's gaze, she stepped on the roof beam and left. This series of events happened so quickly. Originally, everyone was still wondering who could cause Feng Ju to have such a big reaction. However, in the blink of an eye, this person disappeared. Feng Ju stood in place and looked in the direction that Jingyu left. He couldn't recover for a long time. When Jingyu and the shadow returned to the inn, the sky was already completely dark. Jingyu didn't feel anything about what she had done. However, she didn't know that she had caused a huge uproar in Yangzhou City. Jingyu was still sleeping when she heard the noise outside her room. It was so noisy that Jingyu had no choice but to open her eyes. She casually put on a piece of clothing and a veil. Just as she was about to go out, she heard a knock on the door. Jingyu frowned. She thought that it was the shadow knocking on the door. She yawned and helplessly opened the door. However, she was stunned by the person standing outside. "Feng Ju." Jingyu looked at the woman in black, standing in front of her. She was wearing a big hat that covered her face. Benefactor, you are really here. The moment Fengju saw Jingyu, her eyes were filled with surprise. Jingyu didn't expect that Fengju would find her here. Come in. Since she was here, there was no reason to drive her away. After letting Fengju in, Jingyu closed the door again. She didn't expect that when Jingyu sat down, Fengju suddenly knelt down. She was shocked and quickly went forward to pull Fengju up. However, she heard Fengju say, Benefactor, my daughter Jingyu thanks Benefactor for your help. Quickly get up. Jingyu pulled Fengju up. When she heard Fengju's words, she knew that Fengju's real name was Di Xinyue. Didn't I say that you don't owe me anything? This is what you deserve. Jingyu looked at Di Xinyue and said, even if I didn't remind you, you would have your own abnormalities as time passed. I just reminded you casually. To me, my benefactor saved my life. Di Xinyue shook her head stubbornly. She looked at Jingyu with eyes full of gratitude. Forget it. Jingyu looked at Di Xinyue and shook her head helplessly. She didn't say anything else. Benefactor, please tell me where you live. Di Xinyue looked at Jingyu pleadingly. She seemed to be afraid that Jingyu would leave. She said, Benefactor didn't want to tell me your name twice. If I didn't ask around, I wouldn't know that Benefactor lives here. I'm afraid that Benefactor will leave again. It's better if you don't know my name. Jingyu shook her head helplessly. Her eyes were filled with bitterness. She said, if you really want to repay me, then help me prepare horse rations and clothes. Chapter 1405. Benefactor is leaving. When Di Xinyue heard Jingyu's words, a look of astonishment appeared in her eyes. She said with a face full of surprise, Yes, I'm just passing by. Jingyu slowly nodded in response. Benefactor, are you in some kind of trouble? Di Xinyue asked worriedly when she saw Jingyu covering her face, unwilling to see anyone. When Jingyu heard Di Xinyue's words, she slowly shook her head and said, I'm fine. You can't help this small Yangzhou city. Jingyu slowly lowered her head and said with a faint smile, I'll come back sooner or later. I just hope that when I come back, Miss Fengjue can open the city gates for me. I'll be satisfied. Benefactor, don't worry, I understand. Di Xinyue heard something different from Jingyu's words. Jingyu didn't explain clearly and didn't say much either. Clearly, she didn't want to talk about this matter, or she couldn't do anything about it. Benefactor, please wait for a moment. I'll go prepare some rations and horses for you. Di Xinyue bowed to Jingyu and turned to leave. With such a clever girl, it was no wonder that she could live so well in Yangzhou City. Di Xinyue indeed helped Jingyu prepare a horse, rations, and clothes. She even personally sent Jingyu out of the city gates. Standing at the city gates and watching Jingyu and the shadow leave, Di Xinyue fell into deep thought. Miss, who is this benefactor? The servant girl standing beside Di Xinyue was the one who helped her buy clothes this time. At this moment, she was standing in front of the city gates with Di Xinyue. She raised her head and asked Di Xinyue in confusion. I don't know either. Di Xinyue shook her head slightly. Then, a faint smile appeared on her lips as she said faintly, I'm very happy to be able to see my benefactor again and do something for her. As for her background, perhaps it's better not to know. When the servant girl heard Di Xinyue's words, she blinked her eyes curiously and didn't say anything else. The two leisurely walked back to the music hall. Jingyu's words echoed in Di Xinyue's ears. She'll come back sooner or later. Then, she'll help open the city gates. These words were said casually, but Di Xinyue heard a trace of seriousness in Jingyu's words. Perhaps Jingyu's meaning was very simple. She wanted Yangzhou City to be open for her, to be used by her. Di Xinyue's footsteps suddenly stopped. In a trance, she seemed to have understood something. Her heart was beating clearly. Jingyu didn't know that her casual words had saved her a lot of trouble in the future and welcomed a great help. Jingyu also didn't know that her casual words had determined Di Xinyue's life. Perhaps if Jingyu hadn't said anything in advance, Di Xinyue wouldn't have been able to bear the ridicule and would have given up on herself. Or perhaps there were other factors. In Di Xinyue's opinion, Jingyu was her benefactor. She was someone she would use her entire life to thank and be grateful to. Rong, a few days ago, did the governor of Yangzhou say that he wanted to listen to me play the zither? Di Xinyue tilted her head slightly and asked the servant girl beside her. Yes, she did, but she was rejected by Mississippi. The servant girl beside Di Xinyue called Rong, heard Di Xinyue's words, and nodded repeatedly. She replied, Miss also said that if any of these officials came in the future, she would reject them all. Chapter 1406. There's no need. Arrange for the prefect to come and listen to the zither, Di Xinyue suddenly said. Rong Er's eyes widened in shock. She looked at Jingyu and said, Young miss, why did you suddenly? I remember that the pavilion master of the Celestial Peak Pavilion said he wanted to listen to the zither as well, right? Find a time to arrange it. Di Xinyue's words caused the servant girl's eyes to widen. She said in disbelief, the pavilion master of the Celestial Peak Pavilion was so disrespectful to young miss. It's fine. I know what I'm doing. Di Xinyue smiled faintly and turned away without another word. Rong, I didn't understand Di Xinyue's actions at all. But ever since that day, Yangzhou City fell into a very strange situation. Everyone in the city seemed to revere one person, and the factions within the city suppressed each other. It seemed like there was an undercurrent, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't stir up a storm. It was as if someone was deliberately controlling everything. Jingyu didn't know anything about what was happening in Yangzhou City. She was officially on her way to the Tokyo Imperial City. She set out from Yangzhou and arrived at the Tokyo Imperial City. Jingyu was incomparably familiar with the path she took. It was on this mountain that she met the second young master of the poison sect, Yun Jing. She went from Bianxing to Jadestone Pass. Once she entered Jadestone Pass, she was even closer to the Imperial City. After such a long time, Jingyu had finally returned to the Tokyo Imperial City. Standing in front of the city gates, Jingyu's heart couldn't help but tremble at the sight of the people coming and going. She's back. She's really back. Back then, she had been chased like that and fought her way out of the Tokyo Imperial City, becoming an existence reviled by the people of the world. Back then, Xiao Chun had followed her through life and death. He had betrayed the country, the world, and the name of the 9 emperors. He had willingly become a rebel, all because of her. Xiao Chun, I've come to find you. Jingyu's lips curled into a faint smile. You've done so much for me back then, and now it's my turn to do the same for you. The Tokyo Imperial City was still bustling with life, and there seemed to be more new houses on the streets. There were also many new shops. However, there were no more Qianlai restaurants or Jingyu businesses in the Tokyo Imperial City. Back then, he had fled the Imperial City in such a hurry. He wondered what the people in the restaurant were like now. Jingyu led her horse along the streets and looked at the shops that had changed dynasties. Her eyes were filled with nostalgia as she walked forward step by step. She was about to reach the residence of the 9th emperors, but Jingyu suddenly stopped. Let's find a place to stay for today. I'll inform the crown princess of your return. The shadow stood by Jingyu's side and spoke indifferently. Jingyu lowered her head and didn't say anything else. The carriage of the 9th emperors is here. Make way, make way. Jingyu's heart trembled violently when she heard the name of the 9th emperors. This scene was extremely familiar. Jingyu tilted her head slightly and looked at the side of the road. A pitch-black carriage was heading towards Jingyu's direction. She stood behind the crowd and looked at the carriage as it drove over. In a daze, she seemed to have returned to the beginning. Jingyu had heard the name of the 9th emperors for the first time in the border city of the Roman forest. It was also at that time that the two of them met. Chapter 1407. Jingyu looked towards Xiao Chen's carriage and saw with her own eyes that the carriage was heading towards the mansion of the 9th emperors. Jingyu watched as the carriage passed by her. Although they were so close to each other, she felt as if they were thousands of miles apart. Xiao Chun, I'm back. Jingyu looked at the carriage and was about to withdraw her gaze when she suddenly saw a hand reach out from the carriage. It seemed to be a slender finger. The moment Jingyu saw the hand, her body suddenly stiffened. There was a woman in Xiao Chen's carriage. In Jingyu's memory, how could Xiao Chun allow a woman to enter his carriage? Let's go. Jingyu took a deep breath and suppressed the chaotic thoughts in her heart. She turned around and left in the other direction. The shadow looked in the direction Xiao Chen's carriage left and followed Jingyu's footsteps towards the inn. When Jingyu saw Lu Miaoqiu, it was already the second half of the night. When the shadow brought Lu Miaoqiu to the inn, Jingyu was sitting in front of the window and thinking about the overall cause and effect of the matter. During this period of time, too many things had happened. Winter was coming and the night was a little cold. Jingyu lowered her head slightly and gathered the clothes on her body. Then, she heard the sound of footsteps coming from outside the room. Knock, knock. The sound of knocking was heard. Jingyu quickly stood up and opened the door. Lu Miaoqiu was standing outside the door in a pitch-black dress. The two didn't even have time to look at each other and hurriedly entered the room and closed the door. Yeah. Lu Miaoqiu lifted the hat on her head and looked at Jingyu excitedly. Seeing Jingyu standing in front of her, Lu Miaoqiu's eyes were filled with tears. Miaoqiu. Jingyu's face was also filled with excitement. She raised her hands and hugged Lu Miaoqiu. The two held hands and sat down at the side. Time is of the essence. I can't go into details. Lu Miaoqiu looked outside the door and knew that the shadow was standing guard outside. She raised her hand and held Jingyu's hand and said, Listen to me. The Tokyo situation is very dangerous now. I found out everything I can. The 9 emperors are back. I believe you already know. This was the first thing Lu Miaoqiu said. Jingyu nodded, indicating that she knew. Although the 9 emperors are back, the 9th emperors are being controlled. Lu Miaoqiu continued to look at Jingyu and said, A woman moved into the 9th emperor's residence. She called herself the 9th emperor's elder sister. Nailin moved in and obviously controlled Xiao Chun. I only found out that Xiao Chun was being controlled because he was poisoned. Lu Miaoqiu's face was cold as she said, The imperial palace has become Ning Xiangyuan's world. Now that the emperor is dying, Ning Xiangyuan and Nailin Yu are working together to control the entire imperial palace. And you, Jingyu. Lu Miaoqiu slowly stared at Jingyu and said, When Xiao Chun was brought back to the Tokyo, he was unconscious for an entire month. During this month, the imperial palace issued a new order. In the imperial palace, no one is allowed to mention the 9th imperial concubine or Jingyu. If they do, it will be a capital offense. Chapter 1408. In the beginning, many people would still mention it. However, after Ning Xiangyuan's bloody massacre, no one dared to say a word. Lu Miaoqiu sighed deeply. Although Lu Miaoqiu had only said a few words, Jingyu could sense the seriousness in Lu Miaoqiu's words. It seemed that this new rule had been washed with blood. Otherwise, how could it achieve such an effect? I understand. Jingyu nodded slowly. She understood the current situation and lowered her head without saying a word. The imperial city is now in a precarious situation. If you stay here, you'll be in the most danger zone. However, I had no choice but to bring you here. Lu Miaoqiu took a deep breath and said, Linglan and Jinglang are safe in the Roman forest. However, their military strength has been greatly reduced, and the relationship between the countries is on the verge of collapse. The Tokyo is extremely ambitious and wants to annex the other 3 countries. That's why he entered the Holy Family. Jingyu, the only thing we can do now is to seek victory in the midst of danger. Lu Miaoqiu looked deeply at Jingyu and said, In the imperial city, you're the only one who can awaken Xiao Chun. As long as we can awaken Xiao Chun, we'll fight the tiger in this wolf's den and take down the Tokyo. Lu Miaoqiu looked deeply at Jingyu and said, However, if someone discovers your whereabouts, what awaits us is death. Jingyu, we have no other choice. Lu Miaoqiu's words echoed in Jingyu's ears. Jingyu lowered her head and said nothing. I already know everything about the battle in Jinling. Lu Miaoqiu slowly turned her head to look at Jingyu and said, since then, the sound attack aristocrat family has disappeared without a trace. Before they left, they took Yishui with them. Baijiu has been all over the world looking for Yishui, but there is still no news of her. How could this be? Jingyu's eyes widened when she heard the news from Lu Miaoqiu. I'm trying my best to track it down. Lu Miaoqiu sighed deeply and said, the witchcraft of Miaojiang is too powerful. I don't know who hasn't been controlled in the imperial city. Lu Miaoqiu sighed deeply and said, those goo worms are everywhere. If it wasn't for Yijuan, perhaps the people in the crown prince's eastern palace would have been spared. Yijuan? Jingyu's eyes widened. Yes. Lu Miaoqiu nodded and said, did you forget? Back then, Yijuan followed by Qing Ji's side for a long time and learned a lot of medical skills. He has been researching medicine for so many years and has made some achievements. All right, I almost forgot. When Jingyu heard this, she nodded in realization. Her eyes were filled with nostalgia. Back then, everything that happened in the prince's residence made Jingyu feel a little suffocated. Jingyu, I'll leave it to you now. The crown prince and I will be your backup. If you can take down Madame Nye and Nailin Yu, leave the palace to me. Lu Miaoqiu stood up and said, it's getting late. I have to go. Shadow. Lu Miaoqiu turned around and called. The shadow outside the door stepped in. Your favor has been repaid. You're free now. I'm willing to hire you to work for Jingyu. You can name the price. Are you willing? Lu Miaoqiu calmly looked at the shadow and said these words, which made the shadow's body stiffen. Chapter 1409. She raised her head and looked at Lu Miaoqiu for a long time. Then, she turned her head to look at Jingyu. In the end, she helplessly lowered her head and said, I'm willing. Okay. Lu Miaoqiu seemed to be certain that the shadow would agree. She slowly curved the corners of her mouth and turned to Jingyu. This is all I can help you with. Here are the banknotes. I only brought this with me when I came out in a hurry. It should be enough for your expenses for a few days. Jingyu, I'll wait for your good news. Lu Miaoqiu left. However, the atmosphere in the inn became even more serious. Jingyu sat in her original position and thought about Lu Miaoqiu's words. The expression in her eyes became more serious. How do I hide this pair of eyes? Jingyu lowered her head in depression. It seemed that she needed to make some preparations. Shadow, go find Lu Miaoqiu and get more money. We need to do something big. The shadow looked at Jingyu in confusion. However, she still obeyed. In any case, the crown prince's palace should have a lot of money. Jingyu silently complained. The shadow twitched slightly but didn't say anything. If the crown prince heard this, he would definitely be angered to death. It was obvious that the crown prince was angered to death. Lu Miaoqiu, do you think I'm running a bank? Xiao Yuling shouted at Lu Miaoqiu with an ashen face. You're the crown prince. I only took a small amount of money from you. Why are you so angry? Lu Miaoqiu sat calmly to the side. She held a teacup in one hand and lowered her eyes. Her gentle and moving appearance caused Xiao Yuling to grit her teeth. Did I spoil you too much? Is that why you're so lawless? Xiao Yuling stood up and walked to Lu Miaoqiu's side. She raised her hand and pinched Lu Miaoqiu's chin, forcing Lu Miaoqiu to look up at her. Since your highness is like this, why don't you take in a few more concubines? That way, there will be more people to make you happy. I think the woman who gave your highness a sachet last time is pretty good. What do you think, your highness? Lu Miaoqiu raised her head and smiled at Xiao Yuling. When Xiao Yuling heard Lu Miaoqiu's words, her body froze. Then, she slowly bent down and leaned closer to Lu Miaoqiu. Her lips curled into a faint smile as she said, My crown princess, are you still jealous? I didn't. Lu Miaoqiu angrily flung Xiao Yuling's hand away. She stood up and said, It's getting late. Your highness, you should return to your chambers to rest. Hasn't that matter been in the past for so long? Xiao Yuling unhappily grabbed Lu Miaoqiu's hand and said, This time, You didn't discuss it with me and made a decision on your own. We're even now. Who's even with you? Let me do it. Lu Miaoqiu flung Xiao Yuling's hand away in disdain and turned to walk into the room. Xiao Yuling looked at Lu Miaoqiu and calmly shrugged. However, there was a faint smile in her eyes. Just like that, she followed Lu Miaoqiu into the palace. Lu Miaoqiu looked at Xiao Yuling, who followed her in, and instantly widened her eyes in anger. Xiao Yuling laughed loudly and went up to hug Lu Miaoqiu. You've been in a cold war with me for so long. Now that you've made a mistake, do you want me to apologize to you? Xiao Yuling looked at Lu Miaoqiu and said. Chapter 14:10. I didn't say anything. Lu Miaoqiu couldn't break free. When she heard Xiao Yuling's words, she turned her head away unhappily. I really don't know what to do with you. Xiao Yuling lowered her head helplessly. She leaned over and kissed Lu Miaoqiu's forehead. I'm not angry at you for spending money. It's just that you've been avoiding talking to me recently. Something big must have happened this time, right? If something happened to you, what would I do? Xiao Yuling looked deeply at Lu Miaoqiu. I didn't say I wouldn't tell you. Lu Miaoqiu turned her head away uncomfortably. Then shouldn't you tell me now? Xiao Yuling raised her eyebrows slightly as she looked at Lu Miaoqiu. Lu Miaoqiu looked seriously at Xiao Yuling. She smiled faintly and said, I heard that Miss Dong sent some pastries to the Crown Prince yesterday. I wonder if the pastries tasted good, Your Highness? Xiao Yuling's mouth twitched. Without another word, she picked up Lu Miaoqiu and walked towards the bed. I'll try it right now. Are the pastries tasty? Aya, Xiao Yuling, put me down. Lu Miaoqiu turned pale with fright. The Crown Prince's eastern palace was probably the only pure land in the imperial city. When Xiao Yuling found out that Jing Yu was coming, her first thought was to send people to protect her. The money that was sent over made Jing Yu extremely happy. She was practically beaming with joy. Jing Yu took the money and bought a small residence at the edge of the mountain behind the prince's residence. She lived there peacefully. The people sent by the Crown Prince protected the residence. The courtyard wasn't big, but because it was close to the prince's residence, Jing Yu was very satisfied. Have you found out where the 9 emperors are going? Jing Yu stood in the room dressed in black. She tilted her head and asked the shadow. Yes, tomorrow, the 9 emperors are going to the Jinyan Pavilion. The shadow slowly lowered her head. When Jing Yu heard the name of the Jinyan Pavilion, her expression froze. She then lowered her head in amusement. She didn't think that the Jinyan Pavilion was still around. Okay, Jing Yu slowly nodded. Dongqing Imperial City was bustling with noise and excitement. Xiao Qin sat in the carriage and stared blankly at the wall of the carriage. The dark carriage stopped at Jinyan Tower. Xiao Qin lowered his eyes and walked in with a cold expression. Xiao Qin sat alone in his elegant room on the 2nd floor of the Jinyan restaurant. His eyes were looking out the window, and no one knew what he was thinking. Just as he was lost in thought, he suddenly saw a petite figure on the street that attracted his attention. Xiao Qin sat up straight. Just as he was about to take a closer look, he realized that the figure had disappeared. Just as Xiao Qin was frowning, there was a sound from the door of the quiet room. The guard beside Xiao Qin also frowned when he heard the sound. Just as he was about to do something, he saw the door of the room being pulled open. A thin and small woman with a hunched back and a scar on her face walked into the room. Her eyes were covered with a layer of black cloth. She held a walking stick in her hand as she walked into the room. However, the moment she stepped into the room, she stopped in her tracks. So I came to the wrong place. The woman's voice was strangely hoarse. She shook her head as if she found it funny. Then, she turned to leave. Chapter 14:11. This scene caused the guards to widen their eyes. From the beginning to the end, none of them had made a single sound. The woman in front of them was clearly blind, but she had sensed that there was someone in the room the moment she stepped into the room. Furthermore, she knew that she had walked in the wrong direction. How could they not be shocked? Miss, please wait a moment. The guard raised his voice and called out to Jing Yu, who was about to leave. What's the matter? The woman stopped in her tracks indifferently and turned to look at the person who had spoken. "Miss, how did you know that there was someone in the room? We didn't even speak just now." The guard sized up the woman curiously. The woman in front of him smiled slightly. It was obvious that this woman was Jingyu, who was pretending to be blind. For Jingyu, who had really been blind before, this was nothing more than being blind again. It was really easy. "Even though I'm blind, I'm not deaf." Jingyu smiled faintly. She didn't seem to have any intention of saying anything. She used the walking stick in her hand to explore the path before she turned to leave. Just as Jingyu turned around, Xiao Chun, who was sitting on his seat, opened his mouth and laughed. "Interesting." Xiao Chun spoke faintly. He turned his head to look at Jingyu and said, "Since you've walked in the wrong direction, why don't you make the best of it? Sit down and have a cup of tea before you leave." Jingyu paused when she heard Xiao Chen's words. As expected, Xiao Chun had spoken to persuade her to stay. Jingyu turned around and said, "The Ninth Emperor's lowered himself to drink tea with a blind person like me. Did I hear wrongly? This king is very curious that Miss has such good hearing." Xiao Chun smiled faintly and said this. Jingyu sneered and ignored him. She said calmly, "I still want to live a little longer. The smell of the Ninth Emperor's will kill me." Jingyu threw out this sentence faintly and quickly turned to leave. When Xiao Chun heard Jingyu's words, his expression instantly froze. The guards looked at each other, not understanding what Jingyu meant. Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu as she slowly walked down the stairs. He fell into deep thought. This blind person had obviously approached him on purpose. Otherwise, why would she say something like that? She had clearly said that she had walked into the wrong room, but went downstairs directly after she left. But what did Jingyu's words mean? Xiao Chun fell into deep thought. He sat in his seat and pondered for a long time, but he couldn't come up with an answer. In the prince's residence, the sky was already dark when Xiao Chun returned. The moment he stepped into the prince's residence, he saw the person walking towards him. It was a woman wearing a dark purple robe. She didn't look very old, but her voluptuous body was so alluring. Her face was somewhat similar to Xiao Chen's. "Chinner, you're back." This woman was obviously Madame Nye, who was from Yaojiang and was skilled in witchcraft. How could Jingyu not recognize her? Xiao Chun responded indifferently when he saw Madame Nye, then turned to leave. Madame Nye didn't get angry when she saw Xiao Chen's actions. When she saw Xiao Chen's figure disappear, she stopped a guard and asked, "Who did Xiao Chun meet today?" Replying to Madame Nye, "Ninth Imperial Uncle is drinking tea alone in the brocade banquet hall, as usual," the guard replied respectfully. Madame Nye nodded slowly. After hearing the guard's report, she felt relieved and lowered her head slowly. She didn't understand why Xiao Chun liked to sit alone in Jinyan building ever since he came back from the Holy Family. Chapter 14:12. She originally thought there was some inside story she didn't know about, but after observing for a long time, she didn't find anything out of the ordinary. Xiao Chun was still the same as always, so Madame Nye just let Xiao Chun be. Xiao Chun walked into his study and sat down by the desk. He picked up the book and started reading. When the guard beside him saw that Xiao Chun's actions were normal, he lowered his eyes and stood to the side to wait on him. "Interrogation Officer 1, are you back?" Xiao Chun suddenly asked as he was reading a book when the guard finally came to a stop. Soon, the guard heard Xiao Chun's words and paused for a moment before replying. "That's good." Xiao Chun nodded and said in confusion, "I almost forgot what Xing Yi went to do." After Xiao Chun said that, a hint of surprise appeared in the guard's eyes. He furrowed his brows and seemed to be in deep thought. Fortunately, Xiao Chun seemed to have just casually said that, and then went back to his room to rest. After Jingyu returned to her room, she removed the things on her face and changed into a new set of clothes. She sat on a chair and poured herself a cup of water. She coughed, and her voice returned to normal. "Miss you," the shadow called her. Jingyu put down the cup and looked at the shadow. "How was it? Did you get the map of the prince's estate?" "Yes." The shadow slowly nodded. She raised her hand and placed the item in her arms in front of Jingyu. Jingyu raised her hand and took it. She opened the map and a smile appeared in her eyes. Jingyu was very familiar with the layout of the mansion. However, the layout of the guards wasn't the same as before, so Jingyu had to get another one. When she saw the map, Jingyu smiled faintly. She looked up at the shadow and said, "I'll personally go take a look tonight. Don't worry, I won't be exposed." Okay. When the shadow heard Jingyu's words, she frowned in disapproval. However, she seemed to have thought of something and nodded slowly. "Jing, you memorized the layout of the prince's estate." She changed her clothes and went to the back mountain of the prince's estate. She silently snuck into the prince's estate and walked unimpeded. A faint smile appeared in her eyes. Jingyu arrived at Xiao Chen's master bedroom with ease. The person sleeping in the room was Xiao Chen. However, Jingyu could only stand by the window and take a look. She didn't dare to enter the room. When the window was opened, she could vaguely see Xiao Chen's figure moving around in the room. Jingyu hid in the tree outside the window. Her golden-green eyes stared at the scene in the room. Jingyu's eyes revealed a strange color. When Jingyu was looking at Xiao Chen, she suddenly saw Xiao Chen holding onto a chair. His face was pale, but he forced himself to walk to the window. He closed the window and extinguished the light. Jingyu saw this scene, and her heart trembled. She seemed to have sensed something strange. What's wrong with Xiao Chen? Why do I feel like he's suppressing something? Jingyu frowned slightly. When Jingyu was about to take action, she suddenly heard footsteps. Jingyu quickly shrank her body. Then, she saw a woman appear in the corridor. The woman was holding a bowl of medicine and walking towards Xiao Chen's room. Chapter 14:13. As the servant girl approached, Jingyu's eyes were filled with astonishment. The servant girl was none other than Yin Xiao. Jingyu's eyes were filled with shock as she watched Yin Xiao enter Xiao Chen's room. After a while, Yin Xiao came out with an empty bowl. It was obvious that the medicine in the bowl was drunk by Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen was sick. Looking at Xiao Chen's appearance today, she couldn't tell at all. He didn't look like someone who was sick. If he wasn't sick, why would he drink medicine for no reason? Jingyu's eyes were filled with confusion. She thought for a moment and followed Yin Xiao. Before confirming Yin Xiao's stance, Jingyu wouldn't show herself no matter what. However, she could still follow Yin Xiao to see what was going on. After Yin Xiao delivered the medicine, she walked toward the other side of the courtyard. Jingyu followed her in the dark and watched Yin Xiao carry the empty bowl into her room. The person sitting in the room was definitely the person who made this medicine. Jingyu carefully leaned against the window and listened to the faint sounds coming from the room. Finished drinking? A familiar voice was heard and instantly made Jingyu's body tremble. She remembered this voice. It was Madame Nies. It was the person from Yaojiang who claimed to be Xiao Chen's older sister. Replying to Madame, "It's all finished." Yin Xiao lowered her head and moved the bowl forward slightly, indicating for Madame Nie to see that the medicine in the bowl was empty. "Very good. You may leave." Madame Nie seemed to be very satisfied with this and nodded slightly with a smile in her eyes. Yin Xiao bowed in acknowledgement, stood up, and left with the empty bowl. Jingyu frowned slightly and pondered for a moment before turning to leave. Jingyu didn't expose herself and returned to the courtyard. Jingyu didn't know if it was her misconception, but she felt that Xiao Chen's condition must be related to this medicine. She must investigate it when she had the chance. For the next few days, Jingyu wandered outside with the identity of a blind person during the day and wandered around the prince's residence at night. After so many days, Jingyu finally found something strange. Why did Jingyu feel that there was something else between Yin Xiao's delivery of medicine and Xiao Chen? Just as Jingyu wanted to investigate, Jingyu saw someone she didn't expect. Xiao Chen went to Jinyan Hall to meditate, as usual. However, the person following Xiao Chen today was actually Xing Yi. Jingyu hid in the dark and watched Xing Yi and Xiao Chen walk into the inn. The moment she saw Xing Yi, Jingyu's mind went blank. If Xiao Chen was being controlled, then what was going on with Xing Yi? Jingyu's heart skipped a beat, and she made a plan. The moment Xiao Chen entered the private room, Jingyu raised her hand and shot out a secret signal, successfully attracting Xing Yi's attention. Jingyu ran away, and Xing Yi really chased after her. His speed made Jingyu speechless. However, Jing Yu's advantage lay in her nimble body. When she saw Interrogation Officer 1 chasing after her, Jing Yu decisively snuck into the dark alley like a cat after a while. Xing Yi turned around and landed. The moment his feet touched the ground, a dagger was pressed against his throat. Jing Yu stood behind Xing Yi, her hand holding onto Xing Yi's back. Jing Yu didn't say anything. Chapter 14:14. The atmosphere between the two of them was strange, and Xing Yi didn't dare to move. In this strange situation, Xing Yi suddenly trembled and called out, "Madam?" After Xing Yi called out, Jing Yu slowly removed the dagger in her hand. She let go of Xing Yi's hand and watched as he turned around. His clear eyes were filled with surprise as he looked at Jing Yu. Jing Yu's tense heart slowly relaxed. "Xing Yi, you still remember me?" Jing Yu looked at Xing Yi, her golden green eyes sparkling with joy. "Madam!" Xing Yi suddenly knelt down in front of Jing Yu. His eyes were filled with excitement, and his voice trembled as he called out, "Madam, you're still alive. Master even said that you've already." "Of course I'm still alive." Jing Yu smiled helplessly. Just as she was about to say something, her body suddenly froze. What did Xing Yi just say? What did you say? What did Xiao Chun say about me?" Jing Yu's mind went blank, and her eyes were filled with shock. "Madam, this matter can't be explained in such a short time. I'll look for you tonight." Xing Yi looked around and said this to Jing Yu. After he found out Jing Yu's address, he turned and ran. Jing Yu stood in place, her heart trembling violently. For the entire day, Jing Yu's mind was filled with Xing Yi's words. It was as if something wanted to rush out of her chest, but Jing Yu was afraid. Suppressing it again and again, Jing Yu was incomparably anxious. After waiting bitterly for an entire day, she finally heard a sound in the middle of the night. Xing Yi was welcomed into the room. "Xing Yi, you're here." Jing Yu saw the anxiety in Xing Yi's eyes. Xing Yi bowed slightly to Jing Yu, then said to Jing Yu, "I can't stay for too long. Master wanted me to pass on this message to Madam. Master's situation is very dangerous now. Without Master's special orders, Master wanted me to tell Madam not to act rashly." Xing Yi looked at Jing Yu and said slowly, "Xing Yi, what did you say? Xiao Chun wanted you to tell me this? Did Xiao Chun remember me? Why didn't he come and see me?" Jing Yu's voice was trembling fiercely. Looking at Jing Yu's appearance, Interrogation Officer 1 only felt his throat dry up. However, he silently swallowed his saliva and said, "Madam, after Master returned from the Holy Family, he recovered some of his memories intermittently. I wasn't able to stay by Master's side because Madam Nia locked me up." Xing Yi clenched his fists and said, "If I didn't have Sir Qing Ji's medicine to block it, I'm afraid I would have been infected by the goo poison." "What happened to Xiao Chun?" Jing Yu asked impatiently. After Master returned from the Holy Family, he knew something was wrong with him, but he didn't show it. He pretended that he was still infected with the goo poison. This subordinate is the same. We're all acting. It's too complicated, so I can't explain it to Madam right away. Master said that Madam must take good care of yourself. You mustn't leave the mansion during this time and wait for Master's news, Xing Yi said vaguely. "Xing Yi, can you let me see Xiao Chun?" Jing Yu looked at Xing Yi and asked, "Madam, you can only see him from afar in Jinyan Tower. You can't go near him." Xing Yi frowned deeply and said, "Madam, you mustn't expose yourself. Otherwise, Master won't be able to hold on." You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.